The restaurant in Seoul, one of the most sophisticated in the city, was the scene of whispered conversations and restrained laughter, where the sound of cutlery against fine porcelain filled the atmosphere. Dong-hyun, a street kid who knew the alleys and corners of the Korean capital like no one else, was there by chance, attracted by the smell of food and the unusual movement. He had never been to that place, of course, and even from a distance, he felt that it was not for him. He wore worn clothes and his hair was disheveled, the result of sleepless nights on the streets. But his sharp and curious gaze did not miss a single detail. Seo-jin seemed too calm for someone who was hiding such a serious intention, and this made Dong-hyun even more uneasy. He saw her take the small bottle from her bag, hide it in her hands, and with an almost imperceptible gesture, pour the contents into her husband's soup. The movement was so discreet that it seemed part of the routine of that lunch. But it did not go unnoticed by those who observed closely. For a moment, Jae-won, the tycoon, kept his eyes on his phone, unaware of his wife's actions. He looked tired, almost bored with the conversation Seo-jin was trying to start. The boy noticed that Seo-jin's expression changed subtly, a mix of anxiety and satisfaction, as if that act had freed her from an invisible weight. Dong-hyun felt the weight of the decision he had to make. To remain silent meant allowing something terrible to happen. To act could put his own safety at risk. The silence of the elite contrasted sharply with the boy's inner turmoil. Suddenly, the boy stepped forward and, in the loudest voice he could muster, shouted, drawing the attention of everyone in the room, "Hey! Don't eat that!" The restaurant froze in time for a second. All eyes turned to him, the unexpected intruder. Seo-jin froze, and Jae-won looked up from his phone in surprise. That unexpected intervention was the beginning of a turn of events that no one that day could have imagined. Dong-hyun knew that his shout would not go unnoticed. The low conversations immediately ceased, and a heavy silence filled the room. People looked at him as if he had done something crazy, or worse, insulted someone at those exquisite tables. Seo-jin tried to hide the surprise on his face, but it was clear that his entire body tensed. Jae-won, still holding the spoon, stared at the boy with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. It was rare, almost impossible, for someone of that social class to be interrupted so directly, much less by someone like Dong-hyun. The boy, despite the fear growing in his chest, maintained his firm posture. He felt that this moment was decisive. If he didn't act, he could be an accomplice to something much worse. Seo-jin stood up quickly, trying to take control of the situation with a low, almost threatening voice. "You're mistaken, kid. This is a misunderstanding." But her words didn't convince anyone. The waiter, called by a nearby customer, came over to understand what was happening. Jae-won, with his eyes fixed on the soup, seemed to finally realize the gravity of the situation. His face changed from confusion to concern when he saw the contents of the plate being examined closely. Dong-hyun discreetly pointed to the small vial that Seo-jin had dropped while trying to hide it, which was now on the floor next to the table. It was a clear poison, something that any simple laboratory could identify. The atmosphere became tense, and some customers began to move away, uncomfortable with the scandal unfolding there, right in the heart of the luxury restaurant. But at that moment, Dong-hyun was no longer the invisible boy from the streets. He was the voice that prevented a tragedy, and no one could ignore that. At that moment, Seo-jin realized that she could no longer control the situation with empty words. Her gaze, once confident and cold, now trembled behind her perfect makeup. She tried to justify herself, saying that it was all a mistake, that she knew nothing, but the evidence was too clear to ignore. Jae-won, still stunned, finally managed to get up from his chair, his face pale and his eyes fixed on his wife. He could not believe that behind that flawless smile lay such a cruel betrayal. Dong-hyun, Seeing his husband hesitate, felt a surge of courage rising within him. He knew that despite the difference between them, his attitude could change everything here. The other customers, who had initially been curious, were now divided between shock and dismay. Many murmured softly, but there were also looks of disapproval and sympathy. Seo-jin tried to leave discreetly, but was stopped by one of the restaurant's security guards, who had already been warned by the manager. Jae-won, his voice still shaking, asked Dong-hyun to come closer. The boy hesitated, but the look in the man's eyes was one of recognition and gratitude. He said he had never seen someone so young act with such determination and courage. "You saved my life," Jae-won murmured. From that moment on, Dong-hyun was no longer just an invisible face on the street. He was the unlikely hero who had exposed a truth that could have destroyed a family and perhaps even an entire reputation. In the midst of that luxurious environment and strict etiquette, the presence of Dong-hyun, the street urchin, seemed almost surreal. He was still there, standing near the table, his face sweaty and his heart racing. The restaurant was in turmoil. Waiters were whispering and customers were trying to get back to normal, but no one had forgotten what had just happened. Seo-jin was being escorted out, her eyes avoiding any direct contact, while Jae-won tried to make sense of the situation unfolding before him. He looked like a man adrift, his thoughts racing fast, trying to fit each piece of the puzzle that his wife had nearly destroyed. As everything happened, Dong-hyun felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He didn't know if this would change anything for him, a boy who lived invisible to the world. But there, in that moment, something inside him lit up. It was the first time his voice had real weight, that his courage was recognized not as a desperate gesture, but as a decisive act. Jae-won, his voice still trembling, asked to speak with him in private. The boy didn't hesitate, even though he knew he was entering unknown territory. They went to a more remote corner of the restaurant, where the silence reigned differently, charged with a tension that had not yet dissipated. Jae-won wanted to hear Dong-hyun's story, to understand how someone so young and so invisible had realized something that all the adults around him had missed. Jae-won looked at Dong-hyun with a mixture of respect and surprise. He had never imagined that a boy like that could have such attention to detail, or the courage to intervene at that moment. Dong-hyun told him how he walked through the streets near Gangnam every day, observing the people who frequented that luxury restaurant, a place he would never imagine entering. That day, by chance, he saw Seo-jin stirring Jae-won's soup in a strange way, and an instinct made him stay there, watching, until finally he couldn't take it anymore and shouted to stop his husband from eating. The words came out in a rush, but filled with urgency and fear. As he spoke, Jae-won felt the weight of the discoveries that were piling up. Seo-jin, his wife, the woman he loved and trusted, had tried to kill him, something unthinkable until that moment. The tycoon then decided to act quickly, warning the security guards to call the police and asking them to test the soup. The restaurant, once a symbol of status and perfection, was now stained by the shadow of betrayal and hidden violence. Dong-hyun, who until then had been seen as an invisible boy, became a fundamental witness to a story that would shake not only that family, but also the circles of power they frequented. The scene of the unlikely hero began to take shape without the need for glory or pomp, simply for the value of the truth he brought to light. Dong-hyun could barely breathe as the police asked him questions, trying to make sense of everything he had seen. The officers were suspicious at first. After all, how could a homeless kid know something so sensitive? But his answers were firm, clear, and explained every move of the night in detail that only someone who was actually there would have noticed. He told how Seo-jin had quietly gotten up, taken a small bottle from her bag, and poured the contents into the soup, looking around carefully. When Jae-won turned his head to speak to the waiter, she took the opportunity to stir his plate. It all happened so quickly, But for Dong-hyun, who saw every second of it, it was an eternal moment. While the police collected the soup for analysis, Seo-jin was taken to a private room, where she finally couldn't keep her mask on. She felt the game was up, that she could no longer deny what she had done. The authorities pressed her, and under the weight of the evidence and Dong-hyun's testimony, she confessed that she had planned to get rid of her husband so she could run away with another man, someone who didn't belong in those high society circles. For Jae-won, the revelation was a profound shock. He, who had everything, money, prestige, power, saw his world fall apart in a matter of hours. But he also realized something new. The boy no one saw, the invisible one, had been the only one capable of saving him. That night would change everything for them, for Dong-hyun himself, and for the way he would be seen from then on. News of what happened that night at the luxury restaurant spread quickly on social media and among regulars in the Gangnam neighborhood, known for its strict and well-protected elite. Dong-hyun, who until then had been just another face in the crowd of homeless people, began to be seen differently. He was no longer just the boy who lived on the streets, but the young man who had the courage to speak the truth in an environment where lies seemed to be the rule. Several reports began to appear, people who recognized Dong-hyun's face or who had heard about what he had done. Some even began to help, offering clothes, food, and opportunities to the boy who, until recently, had almost nothing. On the other side, Jae-won tried to understand how that hidden betrayal could have gone so far without him realizing it. The wife he imagined so perfect, so controlled, revealed a cruel and calculating side that shook his confidence in everything he had built. Still, amidst the pain and disappointment, he found himself faced with a difficult choice. Let his pride make him just another victim, or accept the help of that unlikely boy and start rebuilding his life. He chose the latter, offering Dong-hyun a discreet job at the company. Something simple, but which for the young man meant a real chance to change his path. That day, which could have been just another dark moment, ended up becoming a turning point in the lives of the three, each one forever marked by the truth that came to light. The impact of that night on the restaurant was not limited to those directly involved. Many of the employees still whispered about Dong-hyun's unexpected scream that had shattered the apparent tranquility of the dinner. For them, who saw powerful figures passing by every day, the fact that a homeless boy had managed to enter and even attract attention in such a controlled environment seemed surreal. Some employees revealed that before that moment, Dong-hyun had often gone through the back door of the restaurant, looking for scraps or any leftover food, invisible to everyone. But that night his presence took on a new weight, as if for an instant he had crossed the line from being just a marginalized spectator to becoming a decisive agent of history. Meanwhile, Na-young, already behind bars, faced not only legal judgment but also public judgment. The Korean media, hungry for stories of high society scandals, was quick to pick up on the case, revealing details of the couple's seemingly perfect life and the tensions that lurked behind the facade. The exposure forced a broader debate about power, money, and the masks people wear to hide their true desires and fears. For Na-young, the fall was brutal, but it also served as a way for Dong-hyun to finally begin to be seen as more than just an invisible boy on the streets of Seoul. Everyone's lives changed that day, and not just because of the assassination attempt, but because of the courage of someone who decided to break the silence. After that night, Dong-hyun's routine changed, although the streets of Seoul remained cold and indifferent. For the first time, he felt that his voice had weight, that his courage had made a difference. Still, life on the streets didn't get any easier. He continued to face the same cold, the same hunger, and the same suspicious looks from the people he crossed paths with. But now, there was something different in the way some people looked at him, no longer as an invisible boy, but as someone who had played a crucial role in preventing a tragedy. Min-jae made a point of meeting him afterwards, quietly and respectfully, to thank him. It was a moment that left a deep impression on Dong-hyun, showing him that not everyone in the world of appearances was as insensitive as they seemed. On the other hand, Min-jae's family suffered a shock that no one could have foreseen. Their power and influence in the business world could not hide the cracks that night had exposed. Na-young's arrest brought internal discussions to the surface, secrets that until then had been hushed up by vested interests and fear of scandal. Close friends and allies drifted away, and Min-jae found himself forced to rethink everything. Not only his relationship with his wife, but also what really mattered to him. Dong-hyun, the boy no one noticed, ended up being the catalyst for this transformation, an unexpected reminder that sometimes the truth comes from where you least expect it. In the days following the incident at the restaurant, Dong-hyun felt a mix of emotions that were hard to explain. He knew that his life on the streets wouldn't change overnight, but the feeling of having done something important gave his daily life a new meaning. People who passed by him no longer ignored him completely. Some even greeted him with a look of recognition or a shy wave. It didn't change his world, but it created a small space of hope. He returned to the restaurant, not to eat because he never had the chance to pay, but to observe, to linger nearby, as if he needed to feel that he was somewhere else, a place where he could be someone who mattered. On the other side, Min-jae was visibly shaken. What to many seemed like a perfect marriage, in fact, hid a sea of conflicts and lies. The revelation of the poisoning changed everything. He spent days locked in his office, between phone calls and meetings, trying to control the damage that the news had done to his public image and his emotional health. Min-jae seemed like a man on the verge of collapse, but also determined not to let his wife destroy everything he had built. Little by little, he began to understand that for him, truth and justice were worth more than the perfect appearance he had always tried to maintain. With Hye-jin's arrest, the atmosphere at the Seoul restaurant changed profoundly. The employees, who had previously seen Dong-hyun as just an invisible, troublesome kid, now regarded him with restrained respect, although fear of the scandal still hung in the air. The owner of the establishment even made a discreet statement, reaffirming his commitment to safety and ethics, as if trying to erase the stains left by the incident. Dong-hyun, for his part, remained steadfast in his silence, trying not to let himself be carried away by his sudden fame. He knew that his life was a daily battle, and that this moment, although important, was just one chapter among many challenges he would face. Meanwhile, Min-jae, now a widower, was dealing with the reality of rebuilding not only his reputation, but also his very existence. The betrayal and attempted murder had consumed a part of him that seemed impossible to heal. In the meetings he had with Dong-hyun after the event, he tried to express his gratitude in a simple, almost shy way. He acknowledged that without this boy no one wanted to see, he could have lost everything, including his own life. For Dong-hyun, this recognition brought a mix of relief and disbelief, as if someone had finally seen his daily struggle, not just the boy on the street, but the human being behind the appearances. In the days following the incident, Dong-hyun's life changed in unexpected ways. People began to look at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. But he himself felt the weight of being seen so intensely for the first time. The boy, who had previously gone unnoticed on the streets of Seoul, was now remembered as the young man who had prevented a serious crime in the city's most exclusive restaurant. However, despite the sudden exposure, Dong-hyun was not comfortable with the attention. He knew that it had been just a courageous act, but that his daily life would continue to be tough, facing the harsh reality of the street and the prejudice that came with it. On the other hand, Hye-jin's arrest brought a series of repercussions within the local elite. Min-jae's close friends and co-workers began to look at him differently, mixing pity with a certain fear. The perfect image of the successful family they had always projected had been shattered in a matter of hours. revealing weaknesses that many preferred to ignore. For Min-jae, in addition to facing the trauma of betrayal, there remained the challenge of rebuilding his life. Now, under the shadow of the attempted murder and public exposure, his trust in people, especially those he claimed to love, was deeply shaken. What followed the chaos in the restaurant was an uncomfortable silence which seemed to hang in the air even after the police took Ye-jin away in handcuffs. Dong-hyun stood there, somewhat lost, watching the people who had previously not even noticed his presence now whisper quietly, exchanging glances between him and the place where it all happened. He felt a mix of relief and uneasiness. Relief for having prevented something terrible, but uneasiness for knowing that the life he led would not change just because a moment of courage put him in the spotlight. Even with Min-jae's gratitude, the boy knew that he was still invisible to most, and that he would have to deal with a world that was not prepared to truly welcome him. Meanwhile, Min-jae sat silently in his office the next morning, staring out the window of his tall building in Seoul, trying to make sense of everything that had happened the night before. He was a man used to controlling the situations around him, but now he found himself vulnerable, questioning everything about his wife, his choices, and most importantly, himself. News of the incident at the restaurant quickly spread among his acquaintances, and Min-jae knew that this story would mark a turning point not only in his personal life, but also in his business and relationships. He felt the weight of an uncertain future, where he would have to deal with the consequences of that betrayal and what had almost cost him his life. That day, right after the incident at the restaurant, Dong-hyun was taken to the police station to give a statement. He was nervous, but firm in his speech, explaining every detail he had seen, every suspicious movement of Ye-jin, and how his scream had been the only thing that prevented the disaster. At first, the police seemed surprised by the courage of this homeless boy, somewhat disbelieving the story, until the analysis of the soup confirmed the presence of poison. The reality weighed on everyone. Dong-hyun's life had changed abruptly, from being invisible to a protagonist who saved a life. However, he felt the tension that this protagonism could be temporary, as if the world was quick to forget those who have nothing but courage. Meanwhile, Min-jae remained introspective in the silence of his mansion, reflecting on the abyss that had opened between him and Ye-jin. That woman, who until then had represented elegance and companionship, was now synonymous with betrayal and danger. The feeling of betrayal was mixed with a strange relief, because the truth had come to light in an abrupt but necessary way. Min-jae knew that he would have to rebuild his life, that it was not enough to just push Ye-jin away. He would have to understand how he had allowed everything to get to this point. And in the midst of this torment, he did not forget the figure of Dong-hyun, the boy who unexpectedly became the key to his salvation. Someone who, in a way, gave hope for a different future, more human and less lonely. In the days following the incident, Dong-hyun's life changed rapidly, but not in the way he had imagined. The media, always hungry for stories of unexpected heroism, soon caught wind of the case. Reporters descended on the area where he used to hang out, trying to capture his image, interview his acquaintances, and turn the boy into news. To many, Dong-hyun was just another invisible street kid, but now he was the kid who had saved a tycoon's life, which brought a sudden, almost uncomfortable amount of attention to someone who had always tried to remain inconspicuous. He felt the weight of this exposure, the fear that at any moment the attention would fade and he would be ignored again. Despite this, Dong-hyun also received unexpected support. People stepped up to help him get off the streets, offering him shelter and opportunities to rebuild his life. But he knew that nothing would be easy. The change would require more than outside help. It would require inner strength, something he was beginning to discover within himself. Meanwhile, Min-jae made a point of meeting the boy in person, not only to thank him, but to show him that she recognized his value, to make it clear that he was not invisible as many made him feel. It was a tense but meaningful moment that marked the beginning of an unlikely relationship between the two. After that encounter, Min-jae took a different approach. He began using his influence to protect Dong-hyun, ensuring that the boy had access to basic resources like housing and education. It wasn't an instant transformation, but little by little, Dong-hyun's life began to take a new direction. However, the emotional scars of that day had not disappeared. He still carried the weight of what he had witnessed, the fear, the doubt, and the grim realization that the world he lived in hid dark secrets. Even in the most exquisite places, the feeling of having entered into a dangerous game, of having uncovered something he should never have seen, remained alive within him. Natalia, on the other hand, was behind bars, facing the consequences of her choice. Her arrest shook Min-jae's social circle, revealing cracks that few had noticed before. The woman who had appeared perfect and in control revealed herself to be vulnerable and desperate, a figure who manipulated appearances to hide her true intentions. Her downfall was swift and brutal, showing that even the most protected elite are far from immune to human failings and terrible decisions. For Dong-hyun, the experience was a reality check. He saw what few have the courage to face, and in a way, it gave him new strength to keep fighting. The impact of that night left a deep mark on Dong-hyun's life. He was now seen in a different light, no longer as an invisible boy, but as someone capable of changing the course of a situation. Min-jae's gratitude was sincere, and he promised not to forget the gesture that saved his life. Still, Dong-hyun knew that despite the recognition, the path to a dignified life would be long and full of challenges. That scene in the restaurant did not erase his difficulties, but it brought him a hope that had previously seemed distant. He would keep fighting, now with the conviction that his voice, no matter how small, could make a difference. Min-jae, on the other hand, was facing an inner turmoil. The revelation about Natalia had shaken his trust in the people around him, and he began to view his own life with more caution. Appearances had fallen, and reality showed him that luxury and power could hide unimaginable cruelties. But there was also a lesson in humanity. No one is immune to making bad choices, and forgiveness, even when difficult, is a possibility. That day changed everyone there, and Dong-hyun and Min-jae's story became a constant reminder that, in any situation, courage and truth can emerge from the most unexpected places.